Imagine this. You've not been feeling yourself for a while now. After months of gathering courage, you finally decide to seek help. You walk into a mental health clinic and you're ready to tell your story. But before you can even meet with a clinician, you're given a clipboard with a questionnaire. First item. In the past 2 months, how often have you felt down, depressed, or hopeless? On a rating scale from not at all to all the time. You stare at these questions, your mind racing. Past 2 weeks, I can barely remember yesterday. And was I irritable this morning? Or maybe I was just hungry. I really don't want to fill out this form. Now, 15 minutes later, you completed this questionnaire. You're being diagnosed with depression. Now you have 2 treatment options. One medication, the other psychotherapy. So your psychiatrist says, well, let's start with this medication. We'll monitor your symptoms over the next few weeks. And if this one doesn't work, we'll try something else. And your therapist says something similar. Let's start with cognitive behavioral therapy for 6 weeks. And we'll go from there. Now there you are. You come back 6 weeks later. And your psychiatrist asks you, is your medication helping? And your therapist asks you, are you feeling any better? A little better, I think. You're genuinely not even sure if that's the case. Now, 3 medications, 2 psychotherapy treatments later, and you're still not feeling great. And on top of that, now you've also gained a lot of weight. Now your clinician looks over your questionnaires and is actually quite pleased. They would call this a clinical success, despite your remaining symptoms. Now, unfortunately, this is a common story. 50% of people experience a mental health condition at a certain point in their lives. 50%. So when we talk about mental health problems, we're not talking about them, we're talking about us. So at this moment in time, 1 billion people are living with a mental health condition. And according to the World Health Organization, depression is the most common cause of disability worldwide. Now, to make matters worse, if you're brave enough to seek treatment, if you have access to treatment, then most likely the mental health care that you're going to receive is inadequate. It's not good enough. Now, as a clinical psychologist and a mental health researcher, I've been spending my career wondering, why are we not better at helping people? Well, there are several problems that might explain this. For example, we're not very good at diagnosing people. The treatments that we have on offer are not good enough. And we don't really have many new treatment innovations. So let's start with diagnosis. Often it takes years before a mental health condition is diagnosed. And then we're losing valuable time for early intervention. And we also underdiagnose people with certain conditions. So for example, depression in older adults or in men. And we misdiagnose. So 40% of people with a bipolar disorder actually were first misdiagnosed with depression. And that means that they might have had the wrong treatment that actually made their condition worse. Now, once we have diagnosed someone, the treatment that they receive is actually also not really good enough. So most treatments are modestly effective for most people, whereas some people might be really responsive to some treatments. The problem is we don't know which person is going to benefit from which treatment. It's a process of trial and error. Mental health medications, like antidepressants, they can be helpful for sure. But they also come with undesirable side effects. So, for example, weight gain. Now, with this process of trial and error, we don't really monitor symptoms well enough. So even if we try a treatment, we don't know if you're responding to it well enough. Now, the future doesn't look much better because we're struggling to come up with new effective treatments. Did you know that clinical trials for antidepressants and other mental health medications are actually twice as likely to fail than for other types of medications? And that happens in the very last stage of those clinical trials, after pharmaceutical companies have already invested billions in these trials. So not surprisingly, in the past decade, actually the investment in mental health medications has plummeted. I don't know about you, but this is not really good enough, right? If we really want to help people better, then we need to solve a foundational problem that we have in our field. And that's the problem of mental health measurement. Now you might wonder, what is the problem with measurement? Well, let me start. So we don't have any objective biomarkers of mental health, like we have in other areas of medicine. So imagine measuring cancer by asking someone how cancerous they felt in the past week, rather than using X-rays or blood tests. So in the mental health field, this is exactly what's happening. We're asking patients how they feel. We want their input. They respond to questionnaires and we talk to them in conversations. But these types of measures actually don't capture the complexity of people's experiences. They don't capture the individual differences. And these rating scales actually come with all sorts of reporting biases, but also with imprecise ratings. They're not very sensitive to change. Now, patients also struggle to really notice these subtle changes in their mood, exactly because of the mental health conditions that they have. Now, also the timing of these measures is not very ideal. It's because we tend to measure mental health symptoms very sporadically, maybe when we go to see a clinician once a month or once a week. But of course, our symptoms, our mental health, is fluctuating day by day, hour by hour. It might even change a lot when we have a conflict at work or when we have some tensions with our family. So how do we solve this problem that we have in the mental health field, this problem of measurement? Well, this is where computational science comes in. Now, for the past decades, people have been researching biomarkers for mental health. The idea was that to replicate this precision medicine revolution that we have seen for oncology, for example. But in mental health, it's been not that successful, unfortunately. So yes, we've seen all these correlations between different mental health conditions and different biomarkers, but these correlations actually are usually very weak and don't explain a lot of variance. But now is the time. In the past few years, we've seen scientific developments that actually make it possible to make mental health measurement a computational science. And so those advancements are digital sensors, multimodal machine learning architectures, and generative AI. So those digital sensors, for example, we are now able to use our phone, make a recording, video recording of ourselves, or we track our movements using our phone. We can use our Apple Watch to track our heart rate, or we can use our biometric ring and track our sleep patterns. And all these technologies are widely available, affordable, and used by consumers worldwide. Now, the second advancement is the multimodal machine learning architectures that are now available. They're new, they're possible. And for example, transformers or graph neural networks. And what they do is they make it possible for us to combine all sorts of different data. So now we can fuse, for example, behavioral data with genomics. And this means that by combining all these different types of data, we can now much better infer mental health conditions than we could when we were just focusing one biomarker alone. And also, these architectures actually help us to deal with the dimensionality curse that we have, which means that we have so many data points for a particular person. But we're able to tackle that now. Now, the last advancement that I want to mention is the emergence of foundational models and generative AI. So this also helps us to tackle this dimensionality curse of having all that data, for example, by synthetic data augmentation. But what generative AI also does is that it has allowed for the emergence of AI agents, conversational agents, autonomous agents, avatars. And what those agents do is they help us to objectively measure symptoms, but they also provide an opportunity for us to develop interventions that are just in time, right, at the moment when we need it. Now, the question is, how do we leverage all these different scientific advancements to actually tackle this problem of mental health measurement? Well, this question is exactly what we are focusing on with the company that I co-founded, Deliberate AI. With a group of computer scientists and clinicians, we are developing multimodal measurements that can objectively measure mental health. So we're using audio and video signals to capture different behavioral markers and physiological markers that relate to mental health. So for example, the voice that I have when I speak, my speech behaviors, how fast I speak, but also the pauses that I have when I speak, and also the muscles that I use in my face and how I move them to express my emotions. Now, we've developed and validated these multimodal models to infer the levels of depression and anxiety. And actually, these models are just as accurate as human clinicians and more reliable than human clinicians. Now, this is only the start, though. So there are other things we're working on. For example, we're now testing out the next phase of this technology in a new clinical trial, where we are developing models to predict the future treatment outcomes of patients based on what they present us at the very beginning of their treatment. So, for example, we're predicting the likelihood of people dropping out or developing severe mental illness or having to need the emergency department. Now, our mission is to make mental health a computational science. And this requires high-quality data sets that are multimodal and also longitudinal. So we need to collect these data sets in both rigorous research trials, but also in real-world mental health settings. And this is no easy feat, obviously. This requires investment. Investment at a scale that matches the enormous burden that mental health is placing on society. Now let's go back to where we started. What would the world look like if we would have solved this mental health problem? So let's imagine going to this mental health clinic. Well, actually, maybe let's step back a little. So long before we go into this mental health clinic, subtle changes in our behavior, like our mood and our sleep, will have been picked up. Not by a person, but by technology that has been quietly and privately tracking things in the background, helping us out. Because of that, you realized earlier that you need help. So now, when you go to the mental health clinic, no questionnaire, no clipboard. Right? The conversation with your clinician flows naturally. And without you even noticing the subtle changes in your behavior and the imperceptible movements in your face, they will have been captured and analyzed. And now your natural behavior has been translated into evidence-based guidance for your clinician to help you best. Now, an app on your phone will capture all the data from your sleep and your heart, so your rhythms. And if something is off, your clinician will notice. And if you don't want to wait until you have your next appointment with your clinician, you can talk to your AI companion and have a conversation whenever you like it. Now, the care you receive is no longer generic. It's personalized to you. So not only to how you are now, but also how that compared to a few weeks ago and a few months ago. And there's no need for trial and error of different treatments. And during the visit to the clinic, now your psychiatrist can actually use their 20-minute consultation with you to focus on you, which is exactly why they became a psychiatrist in the first place. And your therapist will now have more comprehensive, reliable, and more meaningful metrics to measure your progress over time. So there's no need to fit into a number on an outdated scale that doesn't quite fit your experience. You can be yourself. And even after successful treatment, you're not being forgotten. Subtle changes in your data might flag a relapse before you even notice it. So this time, you and your clinician can intervene early and can make sure that you will stay well. So by rethinking the way we measure mental health, we can create a future whereby mental health care is proactive, is personalized, and it's effective.